Hello, my name's Ice37. I am the speedrun world record holder for both Saint Any% and Saint Story at time of recording. And today I'll be doing a guide on how to do a lot of different movement as Saint, very specific Saint movement that you won't be doing with a lot of other characters, mostly because of their tongue, but we'll also be talking about Yeeks today. Now, I'm going to be showing a few things about the run itself that will matter, and that is mostly they're going to be using fast roll button. This will be useful for the Yeek movement, and I'll be talking through it as it happens. If you are using controller, you can use your joystick to be able to do this already. Otherwise, I'll be talking about what fast roll button is and what it does in a bit. The one thing I do want to talk about when it comes to the Any% and the story run is the remix settings here. And that being, it's pretty much the same for every other character. No pulse players, some walls. And the one thing I want to talk about is the blizzard that happens is affected by the no randomized cycle duration, so we do not allow that setting. Essentially, the snow will slowly snow more and more, and it'll make you cold faster. And how fast the snow accumulates, essentially, will be affected by no randomized cycle, as there actually is a cycle that is rolled, and so we will not allow that. So understanding we're using fast roll button, also going to be having input display today to show some of my inputs in the bottom left. It's very important. Now, I'm going to be getting into multiple different parts of the movement. If you want to only hear certain sections of it, you can skip in the video with the timestamps below. I'm going to attempt to write a lot in the description as well. Now, this is only going to be a movement guide. I am going to be going over the actual run itself of Any% and story in a different video, because I know not everyone wants to see one thing or another, and if I'm doing the guide, I can't go over 1,000 different things in the run itself and pause just all the time, because that won't be as interesting. So we're going to have these separate. Now, starting with Saint, here we are in our favorite place, the warehouse, and here is the Yeeks. Now, I've talked about the fast roll button and Yeeks, and so I'm going to show you essentially what I mean. This is a normal jump with the Yeek, is us getting this height. If I hold jump, I actually get automatic jumps all the time, right when I hit the ground. But if I do a fast roll jump, I get this, and this is much better, and we'll really, really want this for the speed run. So to explain what the fast roll button is, essentially, is that if I jump from a 4-block height and I hold diagonally down at a 45-degree angle, I get a normal roll. If I do a backflip, I get a normal roll. If I do a slide, I get a normal roll. If I'm holding diagonally down at a 45-degree angle. Now, if I jump from this height and do a 45-degree angle, I won't get a roll. But if I jump from this height and I hold my fast roll button and left, I will get a roll. Essentially, what's happening is I have WASD for movement, JKL for grab, throw, and jump, and then I have spacebar to my fast roll button. And the fast roll button is a slight down input on a joystick, essentially is what it is, instead of a full down that me pressing S would do. And so this allows us to do a roll angle instead of a flat, straight down 45-degree angle, about a 15-degree angle down from the horizontal instead. And that allows us to have a roll with completely different properties. We actually move a farther distance, if you notice, with a full roll, where we end here normally, but I go almost to this pole, and I stand out of it with a fast roll. Additionally, I can actually grab items in your fast roll. So being able to do rolls in more situations than you normally would, and just this fast roll has much different properties, where if I go over and grab a Yeek, I can do the fast roll jump. And if I do it with a normal roll, I can't do it. Essentially what I think is happening is because the fast roll has weird properties, the normal roll can't do the jump. And with the fast roll, both the Yeek jump and jumping out of the fast roll is overlaid over each other. So both are happening at the same time to get this big jump. And so that's essentially what we're going to be going for, is having both happen at the same time. Now, to understand the Yeek a bit more, because people think they're so inconsistent, they don't really understand. Now, it is annoying to deal with them, but they are very consistent when you know how to deal with them. And that being, as you notice, the yeek is kind of struggling in my hands, and when it does struggle in my hands, and if I jump at the wrong time, I actually will just do a normal jump. If the yeek is not physically touching the ground, you will not get a yeek jump. That is the number one thing you need to understand. The yeek needs to be physically touching the ground for you to do the yeek jump. Another thing for you to understand is that with the fast roll, or really any roll, you can actually jump out of the roll before you ever hit the ground. And so it's kind of happening now, and especially happened there. If you see the tongue come out, that means I jumped before I was touching the ground. Now if you think about that, that doesn't make any sense, right? But essentially what happens is, as you're falling down, it calculates the next few frames of where you're going to land, and if it's ground, you can jump out of a roll. If you're going for a roll, that is. And so this can be used in the wall and other places, you falling down, to break your fall a lot. In this case, it's not great, because there's the chance that the yeek is not touching the ground, because you're not touching the ground. And so you don't get the yeek jump. You just get the immediate jumping out of a fast roll, like that. So the tongue come out, you'll see that happens. You've pressed jump too early. On the other end, because the yeek needs to be touching the ground, you can jump at parts of if you're just going and having the roll go, I'm getting it right every time. But if you are in a roll and you're at a part of the roll where your face is really high up and you're flinging this yeek around and the yeek happens to not be touching the ground while you're in the roll, you're not going to get the big jump. Now, there is a lot of different places where you can jump out of the roll where it does get the yeek jump, just because of if the yeek is going to be touching the ground or not. But we're going to focus on just right when you immediately hit the ground and jumping out immediately and getting the yeek jump. The thing that I recommend is just look at the yeek. And so as I hit the ground, I'm just looking the yeek, and I'm going to press jump when the yeek hits the ground. And I'm going to worry about nothing else. So I'm doing a fast roll, but I'm just going to press jump right when the yeek hits the ground. That is kind of a starter thing for you to get started learning it. You understanding what I'm saying with we're overlaying the fast roll and jumping with the yeek, and that the yeek has to be touching the ground, and how the fast roll properties works, and us not pressing jump too early, and being able to jump in certain parts of the roll so that the yeek is actually touching the ground to get both parts. That's what's really important. Now, one other thing is we're using a yeek in Saints Run to jump over worm grass and jump through worm grass. The thing is, the worm grass is going to visually be in front of us. Additionally, if you kind of notice here, I'm kind of standing on the ground, but like the foreground of the ground is like here. The foreground of the ground in a few other places are going to be like up here and covering our feet. It's going to change between room to room. So where the ground actually is going to feel different from room to room in every different place. And so you learning visually and kind of feeling when you're actually going to hit the ground and when you can jump out of this fast roll is something you've got to learn and come to terms with. You'll notice it when you actually do the run, how that'll actually matter. And you'll just notice that in different places if you're not doing the speedrun and you're just messing with the yeek. Even as other characters. You don't necessarily need to do anything I just said as Saint. We just do it in the Saint speedrun, and I'd rather this be out there. Now, let me look over my notes real quick to see if there's anything else to say about Yeeks. Hello, post-recording Iced here. I'm going to talk about one other thing with the Yeeks. Turns out you do not actually need the fast roll thanks to a discovery by Erie, another Saint Rainworld runner. We're going to show it off here real quick. So notice my inputs. I'm not going to be using the fast roll whatsoever. We're just going to use the normal roll. Now, if I just hold diagonally down and try to jump out of it, I'll never get the jump that I want. Same rules apply to the yeek. The yeek must be touching the ground, so we only do that at certain times. But essentially what we can do is we can let go of down, and we could still jump out of the roll. So once we start the roll, we can let go of down and then jump out of it. In my experience so far of doing this, I'm at least always going to get a jump. Well, except there, maybe. Even if I'm going to get a jump more often than not. It may not be the full combination of a roll and a yeek jump together, but you will get something. So again, just kind of look at my inputs. Essentially what we're doing is we're falling from the height, we're getting a roll, I'm letting go of down, and then I'm pressing jump to jump out of the roll. So the main thing we are going for is to press jump only after we have let go of down. We just cannot be holding down with the yeek. Because if we hold down with the yeek, we will not get the jump that we want from the yeek. And in some ways, this seems like this is more consistent. Depends on what you think is better and what you are comfortable with. So I definitely try this out, especially if you're someone that does not like the fast roll. Now, before we get into the section with the Saint tongue movement, the one thing I am going to talk about that I'm realizing that is going to be an important thing later on is the ability, the Saint ability. Now, this is going to be mainly, I'm going to be talking about this in the speedrun setup for the game. So the speedrun guide for the game, I'm going to be going over how to use the ability and use it well. But there are some movement things to it, and as we'll talk with the Saint movement in particular, with the tongue, a lot of situations we will find where we can fall from a high height, and then we can then transfer the energy from going straight down to going straight horizontally. So in a lot of cases, when we use the ability, can't use it here in Arena, which is mostly why I will not have it in this video. But you want to go a bit higher, then fall, get some speed, and then gain that speed to go forward. So just some things and thoughts thinking about while we're going to go moving into this next section about the base Saint movement. So we'll go back to present day Iced. All right. I think I have said everything for that. So now we're going to moving on to normal Saint movement. Now again, with throwing items or doing any base movement, you of course can do any of that. I'm not going to be explaining that because that can be very useful for other characters as well. And it is useful for Saint. In Saint, we're also going to be carrying a lot of food a lot of the time. So you're not necessarily going to need a huge amount of items, or you're going to be holding these items so you can hit a creature that may be in the way. Now, for Saint movement, we're going to talk about normal grapple. You may know normal grapple, and it is quite alike to it, but there's a lot of things different. And you probably already know if the tongue is on something, if I press jump, I can jump out of it. Additionally, if my tongue is on something, it'll kind of slowly bring me to a certain height away, which I always think is a little bit odd. Otherwise, if I press up, I will go up. It'll retract it. If I press down, it'll unretract it, and I can go pretty far away. We can also do this while holding left or right as we want. Now, it can be annoying going past fulls. It can kind of mess us up, but this allows us a lot of different control in case we feel like our swings aren't as good. So we can kind of just come close right here and then just get up. So in certain situations, that'll be really good. In other situations, well, we'll talk about other things in a little bit. But normal grapple, there are 2 firing modes that I always tell everyone. For Saint, I say there's 3 firing modes. When I say firing modes, I mean how the tongue comes out of our body. It's going to act differently in certain situations. And if I hold straight up, it'll go straight up and it'll auto aim to things that are above me. Now, if there's nothing that's reasonably nearby, consider a cone to be above you that is gonna lock onto a thing above you and then bring you to it. And then you can jump out of it as you want. That's holding straight up. Now, holding straight left or right is the second firing mode that is also for grapple, the normal grapple. And in this, we can get our big swings because the angle is always going to be fixed, more or less. You can kind of see it still kind of auto aim above me. It's only going to auto aim on the either left or right side, wherever angle I'm holding. So you are going to have a little bit to it, but expect the tongue to always go at this fixed angle. Additionally, because if we're falling really fast, be aware that the tongue is a bit affected by gravity. But really, this is mostly on when the tongue actually retracts back to us that gravity actually matters, which I'll talk about that later. The third firing mode, and is very important for us getting past poles, especially important for really tight areas, like if I have to go up here. And so the third firing mode is us holding nothing. And again, in the bottom left, you can see my inputs, WASD, jump, grab, throw, and spacebar is my fast roll button. If I try to go up and I'm holding up, it becomes really annoying all of a sudden to go up past these poles. If I hold left or right, I kind of have to do this little snaking motion, and it can still kind of work, but it's pretty annoying. But if I hold nothing, it's going to carry over the last left or right input I was doing and send the tongue directly in the same direction as if I was holding left or right. And we can kind of tap left or right and then be also holding nothing, so we're not too worried about it. So if I can go back left and right, but I'm not actually holding anything, I can go past poles. As long as I don't press up, I will not grab them. This can be very useful for tight spots or spots where I do need to go left or right, but still need to... I'm mainly going to be using this if I primarily need to focus on going straight up. So if I'm going past poles or otherwise need to be directly next to a wall without grinding my face into it by holding right directly into it, then it's a very important thing to know and to be able to use. It is odd to be able to press nothing as an actual movement tech, I understand, but it is something that it is important here. So now something else I'm going to talk about, those are the three firing modes. Some certain situations that you'll kind of be thinking about that'll be very common that you'll do, especially in the initial area in Sky Islands. The room before the gate in Sky Islands, there's two spots where essentially you see ground up to the right, and I can hold right, and I'm constantly holding right, and then I can go and jump straight up it. I don't need to do anything fancy, just 2 licks. I'm jumping out of it immediately. I'm only holding right, and I'm making it. And so sometimes it's just kind of setting up these situations where maybe I'm falling from here, and then I do 2 licks while only holding right, and then I'm going up where I need to. Now, of course, when I do the guide for the Saint speedrun, that is going to be its own thing, and I'll talk about in specific situations what I think about and what I think you should think about as well. And now, the other thing to definitely talk about, I didn't really talk about with the second firing mode, holding directly left or right. Now, a lot of people that I've noticed first starting out to speedrun Saint are really getting into it. They find that jumping out of a tongue hitting a wall or otherwise immediately the moment it hits the ground is really useful. And yeah, it is, especially for climbing real high. But if I'm trying to go across a decent horizontal distance, I'm really going to want to try to swing. And I didn't do a great swing there. But getting a good swing, not jumping out of it immediately, letting yourself able to gain some speed on different swings, that is something I find very important. Additionally, if I fall a high distance up, I can, in fact, get a lot of that speed to carry over and now move over horizontally. One other thing to kind of say is that, yes, I can kind of just hold directly left or right, depending on the direction I'm going, but I can also press up and keep a lot of my speed, like there, while just keeping height. So sometimes you're going to go for gaining more speed, or you're going to go for just gaining height. Also depends on where the terrain is, because you don't want to just fall off and hit the ground or otherwise hit walls or anything. You need to decide when is good for what location as you're gaining speed. And so you gain speed with holding left or right, but you're generally going to gain height with you holding up. And though I kind of showed it off there a bit. Additionally, again, it is very dependent on what the terrain is, because maybe the tongue going straight left or right won't hit any terrain, but you pressing up will, in fact, hit terrain. Like there, where I just force myself to gain a little bit of height before I go into a dead zone, essentially, and then I can go much farther than I would normally. The important thing, essentially, is to be able to control your speed and be able to control your height. You really don't want to touch ground, ever, if you can. Especially when you're getting a lot of the speed. Most of the problem with Saint is just doing areas really, really fast and being able to go through the choke points that you're going to have to go through, especially in subterranean, that you have to deal with as Saint. Now, again, I'm saying that the getting big swings is really important, but of course the jumping out of the tongue immediately is also really important. You just can't do one or the other all the time. You need to decide what's good. Maybe you need to wait and then retract and then go up there is the fastest thing to do. Or maybe you can salvage it and just do a bunch of tongues up if you know what you're doing with that. Now, moving on to the next thing is understanding the tongue has a certain distance that it goes. And this is actually more important than you think it is, other than just what things you can get. So the tongue basically went to this distance, right? And so there are two things to understand when it comes to this. And that is one, you might have seen it a few times already, especially right there. If the tongue hits terrain at its maximum distance that it can possibly go, then it's going to bring you towards that terrain. Because essentially, the tongue can go a certain distance, but the tongue can only actually be a certain length. And so if it's grabbed something beyond the length that it can actually be at, you're going to get forcibly brought towards it a bit. And you can use this to gain speed in places where you wouldn't normally be able to gain speed. And there's some places that I like to do setup for it. For the most part, for people starting out learning Saint and otherwise, just understand that's a thing that can happen. And then maybe you start looking for areas where it can be quite useful. Or otherwise really gambling for gaining a huge amount of speed in huge horizontal sections because you try to get this sweet spot constantly. You can also do this going straight up where the tongue hits basically the maximum distance straight up. You can see it there where I got slingshotted up. The other part of the tongue's maximum distance is you could see I can grab poles. Now you also saw with the previous tongue is that I did it from here and the tongue went a maximum distance about here, but it didn't grab the pole. So the way that the tongues work is for grabbing poles is that the tongue goes a maximum distance of like, I say I did it from here and it goes a maximum distance here. When it retracts is the only time it can grab poles. So when the tongue's coming back to you is the only time it can grab poles. When it's out to the maximum here, it's only going to be able to grab poles retracting from about here or so. So it's about the same thing with the maximum distance before. We need to understand that there are distances the tongue will not be able to grab the poles. Also, you can kind of see physics affecting how the tongue does in certain situations. And so there's not a huge amount of places where we're going to need to actually grab poles, but understanding that is a thing that can happen is very important. The big thing is with chimney canopy echo. The main thing I want you to understand is that when we're going up there, we're going to want to try to use the tongue to go up. But the important thing is if I'm really close to a pole, especially like right here, I kind of jumped, I sent the tongue out, and then I've started to fall already before the tongue actually hits the pole. So there's times where I'm actually grabbing poles, but I'm actually losing height. And so really trying to have it be what is essentially the perfect distance away to grab a pole without it actually missing, it can be very important, especially at the room that the chimney echo is in. Now, another thing that I'm going to talk about is we're in the upright state. Here's a basic thing for a lot of characters. We're in the upright state. This is the all fours state where essentially we're completely floppy. We can fall over ourselves. If I do a backflip, we are in an all fours state as well. Now, backflip state, of course, is a little bit different than normal, but consider just there's the all fours state and there's the standing up straight state. Because of how Saint works and because of how they kind of force themselves to be upright, we actually can gain more speed while in the upright state. And so that'll be a thing that you'll want to think about, especially in certain locations. that you may not be getting the full amount of speed that you want. You can have more control if you're in the all fours state, but you'll have more speed if you are in the upright state. Just because of Saint forcing themselves to be straight, because that has an effect against the tongue that allows us to propel ourselves much faster. I don't really know how to explain it. That's just something you need to understand. Now, I do not believe I have a huge amount that really matters to talk about at this point. One thing that I'll kind of talk about that isn't like specific, randomly specific stuff in specific locations that you want to think about of how you want to move as Saint is that the tongue, okay, let's have a good example for this. The tongue can decouple from your body, essentially. So, yes, the tongue kind of goes at this set angle from wherever you do it, and the gravity can kind of affect it, depending on how fast you're going. But the gravity mostly affects it when the tongue is actually returning back to you, to the point where the tongue can actually not properly make it back to your body, and is instead now orbiting around your body, to the point where the tongue can actually be underneath you. So now the only part of the tongue that actually matters is the tip of it, because that's the one that's actually going to grab anything. And so, essentially, as I've learned, is in certain situations where you have high speed, the tongue can orbit around you, and that especially can happen in the room coming down from Sky Islands. You're in the first big open room in Farm Arrays. You're going off to the right to the Yeek. You can fall down, you can hit a terrain, and you can have your tongue come out at the same time you hit terrain. If you do the same thing we talked about with the Yeek, you technically don't want to do. And if it didn't hit terrain in that case, the tongue would go out. It would then try to go back to where you sent the tongue out, but you're not there anymore because you jumped out of the roll, and now you're moving really fast downwards again. And now the tongue's trying to get back to you, and now it's orbiting around your body, and it can be underneath you as you're going down to the surface ground. To the point where if the tongue hits the ground before you, you can jump out of the tongue before you ever touch the ground, and that allows you to fall much larger distances than you normally would be able to. Now, that's the only location, that Farm Arrays location that I talked about, that I found it to be useful, or that I even get the thing happening. Understand it's a thing that's happening, and also having more people know about it to be able to potentially find more and more interesting stuff with it, I think is great. And I'd love to see more things with it. I don't really know how useful it is, and I wouldn't really say like, yes, this is a thing you need to know. But saying everything that I know about Saint is the point of this video, and I think that's a pretty cool thing. All right, let me look at my notes one more time here to see if there's anything else that I want to say, and it does not look so. So thank you all for listening to this video. Again, this is going to be a first part of me just talking about all the movement for Saint, and I'm going to do an actual guide for the any percent and story run for Saint later, and then I'll refer to this guide during that, but a lot of specific examples I'll also be having in that guide. But yeah, that's everything for me, so thank you all for watching. Goodbye.